Alright.
What time is it anyway?
Should be good to go.
Money.
We are live, huh?
Yes, sir.
Is it a wide shot or?
Yeah, it's white.
So they already know that I have these two scoundrels on the porch?
Yes.
They already know we have guests in the house.
It's true.
Good guests. These are great guests, actually. My good friends, Patriot Academy grads, and political consultants extraordinaire, Luke Macias, Brad Schaefer. Hey, guys.
Hey, Rick.
Thanks for joining me.
Good to be here.
Yeah, good fire, huh? It's
Indeed.
kind of weak today. It was a lot better last night.
Yeah, but luckily it's actually, I don't know what it was last night. Last night was colder, right?
I think it's just the hot air, extra hot air on the porch.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Is making
We've had
it
a lot of
difficult.
hot air going today.
Yeah, we have. We have. So these guys are out here filming our next project for Patriot Academy called Campaign Coach. It's time to get thousands of people to go run for local office. And you guys are equipping them through this online course that's going to be really easy for people to take, but answer tons of questions about should I run for office? If I do, how do I run for office? Y'all been doing this for a long time, so it's kind of cool to get all that information out of your head, put it into this course, and that way you don't have to hold every candidate's hand, but actually hand off this course to them to get started.
No, absolutely. It's been a very full day. We've tried to cover a lot of ground, but the course that we've ended up putting together and will be hopefully live sooner rather than later, I think will have a major impact on anybody out there who's concerned. I mean, this year has definitely woken up a lot of people who have realized government is way too big.
Yeah.
And then they start reaching out to their local officials going, wait, are you on board with this? And they realize it's not just the commentators on MSNBC, it's their local city councilman who
right.
also has a problem when it comes to their mindset. So hopefully those people can have something like the course we've put together to really equip and empower them to go, hey, I could step into the arena in this way.
I know that shocked me. I think it shocked a lot of people because I've seen their comments that their own local officials, in sometimes small town America,
Yes.
have jumped on a lot of this COVID fascism and overreaction, which we were all scared initially in March, but there's been very few of these folks that pulled a Ron DeSantis and went, okay, I messed up, I was wrong, we shouldn't have done that, now we're going to do it the right way.
Yeah.
They've just dug in, even at the local level, and you wouldn't expect that from your small town mayor or county commissioners, but it's made a lot of people want to run for office.
Absolutely.
We want to make it easier for those folks to step up, kind of lower that learning curve, and help them figure out what are the questions that I need to answer early on to make this campaign easier. What's the basic structure that I got to put in place? And what's my homework checklist, if you will, to take me from I'm thinking about it to answer, should you run? Are you actually ready? And then show you how you set the process so that you can win an election and go serve and make those kind of positive changes.
These are, I started to say, valuable questions to answer. This is thousands and thousands and thousands of, I should say millions of dollars. Definitely millions of dollars of experience that you guys have in this arena. And for an individual that's thinking about, I'm going to jump into this arena, I'm going to possibly run for office, that's a big decision to make. And for you guys to walk them through and give them a chance to really think through this and make an informed decision is just, it's huge. It's huge. Most candidates don't get that. And they either regret it later or run a lousy campaign or wish they hadn't done it, or they could have won and been a great conservative, right? A good patriot in office. But because, as we even said today, that was kind of that ignorance on fire. They just got excited.
Yeah.
They got hacked off at the local county judge.
Right.
They ran unprepared.
Yeah.
And now they've kind of burned that bridge where they could have done a lot better that first time out. Maybe they didn't burn the bridge, but I mean, they definitely could have done better the first time out.
Well, it's cheaper than the School of Hard Knocks, right?
Yes.
So you can run. A lot of people are victorious their second and third try. In fact, and I will say that I like a lot of people running multiple times. It shows a resilience, and a lot of people get elected the second or third try. But if you're able to do some preparation ahead of time, then you might actually be successful that first time out of the gate.
It's like so many other things. I mean, whether it's, business, goal setting, family, whatever, asking the right questions is critical.
Yeah.
And as doing this course, you get people to think through the right questions. Yeah. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. It's going to be huge. We don't know if your dad will kill me if I actually say a date on here. So,
He's watching, ready
he's
to.
probably watching. And he's
He
like,
has easier access to me than
it'll be
you.
ready tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Yeah,
No,
don't say that.
not even close.
You're going to get me in more trouble than you will be.
We do want to have
In
it
that
ready.
case, maybe we should put a date out.
Okay, there you go.
We're gonna. I did look up the deadline for filing in Texas for these local offices coming up in May, and it's February 12th. I thought it was going to be like mid-January. I don't know why I was thinking it was so soon, but it's February 12th. So we'll have it out before that. Don't kill me.
You did a date.
Okay, if we don't have it out, then you have to go ahead and file anyway. That's
Yeah.
your run before
Look.
you ask the questions.
Yeah,
Win
we're
or lose, you'll learn something.
You'll-
Go for it.
Yeah, file on the 12th, and then find out if you should run or not once we put out the course.
Yeah,
And
That's
then
something.
you can withdraw if you.
Whoa, I'm not ready.
All right. Hopefully we will have it ready by then. But it's going to be a wealth of information. Good stuff. But this is, I've spent a lot of time on this porch talking about the presidential election, the electors, all that kind of stuff, and every time said, but we have to think past January 6th, past January 20th.
Yep.
You don't save a nation with one presidential election, win or lose. You don't lose a nation with one presidential election. We have to start thinking long term and start thinking locally.
And I think you've pointed this out, Rick, before, but a lot of the good examples too have been on the local level. So while a lot of states while our state in Texas with a governor who's just passing whatever executive order he wants, shutting down businesses left and right, telling people exactly what commerce they're allowed to engage in and how not, they are at a state level, we have a Republican leadership that's basically trying to micromanage the lives of Texans.
Well, you say governor. I hate to be Princess Bride here, but I don't think that word means what you think. You called him a governor. I thought a governor was in a republic and had a legislature.
That's true. We have like a quasi-dictator.
Yes,
right?
well, not quasi. You're on my front porch.
Okay.
I called him a dictator for.
I'm on Facebook Live.
For 9 months, I've called him a dictator. Okay,
No,
I'll
it's
call
bad.
him a dictator. You call him.
Okay, let me say. We have a person who has made unilateral dictatorial decisions without any legislative oversight.
And that's what they'll teach you to do, is say things much better than me. That's why I'm no longer in office and don't ever want to run for office again, because now I can call Governor Abbott a dictator and not care. Okay.
But here's the truth. While that was happening, and while it still is happening, in fact, it's funny because Austin tried to shut some restaurants and bars down, New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
And then the governor came out and said, I can't believe he's trying to shut these restaurants down. And you're like, you've shut those restaurants down at 50% capacity. So Abbott's like, hey, don't listen to other governors when they try to, any other public official.
Is that what,
Any other attempted tyrant that tells you what you can do with your business, you better ignore them. But if I tell you, everyone listen to me and do exactly what I say.
You would actually appreciate my retweet whenever he said that. All I said was, I wonder where they learned to be dictators from.
That's right.
And
attitude reflects leadership, right? And so I'm in plenty of trouble there because I think I did a podcast on this one. But that's Remember the Titans, right?
Yeah.
So there's that part where there's the team captain and he's the white guy getting on one of the black players for not taking the game more seriously. And one of his points was, he said, look, your guys are not taking it seriously either. Any of your white guys, your white buddies aren't taking this game seriously. So I'm not going to get all my black friends to take this game seriously either. And the guy says, that's the worst attitude I've ever heard. And he says, attitude reflects leadership, captain. And so the next day, that captain of the team, and Remember the Titans, takes it seriously, starts getting on all the players for not being serious about the game of football that they're playing, and it changes the culture. And so here's what's so funny, right? Governor Abbott has basically told the entire state, the government is the one that decides what businesses get to stay open, who gets to work, who gets to get a paycheck,
how many tables you can have in your restaurant,
exactly how many people.
chairs.
Brian Slayton loves to point out the fact that evidently a lot of government thinks that COVID knows whether you're sitting or you're standing.
Right.
And he was trying to figure out, do they know if you're sitting on a stool? Because then you're as high as when you're standing, right? But we should ask some government bureaucrats so they know how to mandate our actions. So the governor does that, and then he turns around and says, I can't believe these local officials are being tyrants. But you're the one who set the example, giving them the roadmap for it.
Yeah.
So
now you were headed somewhere positive, and I took us down that negative path. You were about to say, I think, if I can read your mind for a second, that some of the heroes have come from the local level as well.
That's right. County judges had an opportunity to, one, try to pass some executive orders that were, further restricting their businesses and doing other things. But you had other counties that said, wait a second, we're going to push back from this. County judges, county commissioners, sheriffs who said, I'm not going to go ticket businesses who are not mandating masks and, have more than 50% capacity within their areas. You had county judges saying, hey, we want to make it clear to the businesses in our county that you can open up, 100% and that this county is going to support you in doing that. So, that's the great takeaway, is that some people might have been woken up and they could be, retired military, running their business, actively involved in their church, and all of a sudden they're looking around saying, man, 4 or 5 of the local counties started stepping up against this tyranny. Why didn't my county judge start doing that? Maybe I should consider doing that. Yeah. That race is in March of 2022. So guess what? Now's a perfect time to start educating, preparing, equipping yourself to jump in that arena.
Huge point. So even if you're thinking, okay, the May elections are too soon, now's actually the time to be thinking about next year. 2022 elections right now is the recruiting time for guys like you to find candidates and be talking to candidates, right?
Absolutely. Well, you got to look and see, in my local area, some of the questions we talked through are the logistics side of figuring out how many votes you got to get, how many people vote in your election. Go figure that one out before the course comes out, since we got the deadline looming. But in many of these cases, we're talking about a few hundred votes. Yeah. And so you're saying, okay, well, I got 6 months. Here's where I'm at. You're going to take the course, figure out this is not that big of a deal, and here these guys help us out with this process. And that way you're ready to go do it now. In many of these cases, while people are mad about these current issues that are going on, now is the time to strike with iron's hot.
That's right.
If that's been a major issue in your local area, and you've been one of the leaders in your community saying, hey, this is important that we don't support tyranny at the local, state, or federal level, then now may be your time to step up and lead. And we're going to try to help show you how to do that.
Yeah. I love it. Now's a great time to be thinking about it. And remember, courage is contagious. So when a few sheriffs or county judges stand up and do the right thing, others will learn from that. We've already seen that even across the country right now. When a few state legislators said, hey, we want to investigate what happened in our state, others finally started getting on board. We finally had the hearings, finally got to see some of the testimony and see some of the evidence and what happened in those states. And then my favorite example, Josh Hawley stands up. He takes a stand, says, I'm going to object to these electors. And then within a few days, you got Ted Cruz leading the way with 11 others. Now we're up to like 140 House members that plan to object. Unfortunately, our own state, our U.S. Senator John Cornyn, who's been there for 20 years, he was Attorney General here in Texas, and the man does not know how the 12th Amendment works. This guy actually said that if nobody gets to 270, then Nancy Pelosi gets to choose the President of the United States. He doesn't even know how they vote by state whenever no one gets to 270. This is a U.S. Senator that was Attorney General. That tells you how few people know how the Constitution works. That's why we study it constantly. I learn something new all the time. I mean, I'm always telling people, I'm no guru. I learn with you. Everybody always stumps me. When a U.S. Senator that's been there that long and was Attorney General and is about to make a major decision about how the Electoral College plays out, does not know the basics of the 12th Amendment, how can we expect them to know what happens if one house objects and the other one doesn't, and all these other complicated things we've talked about over the last few weeks? Anyway, I'm very frustrated with my own U.S. Senator. Unfortunately, he just won, so he's in for 6 more years.
Yep.
But the local offices are coming up right now in May. There's going to be city council elections, school board elections. I guess not county commissioner in Texas. That'll be in November.
But they'll all be city and school.
Yeah, city and school in Texas. Now, in your state, wherever you may be, it might be different. But start looking into that and start thinking about, one of the things we really talk a lot in the course is you may not want to run, but you know someone who could. And when you take this course, you'll really, it makes you start thinking about what makes a good candidate. So you're going to have people come to mind and go, man, I need to talk to Susie or Joe or whoever at church or work or whatever and see if they'd be interested in running. So now's the time not only to think about whether or not you should run, but who can you go talk to about running?
Most definitely.
Well, you got to build that avatar in your head. As you go through that process, saying, here are some of the things that you got to check off and what a good candidate looks like, you're going to have that list. So to have your notepad with you, start thinking about, even now as you're thinking about it, as we're talking, start making that list of who you need to call. Say, hey, get the course, think about running, where are you at, who are we going to support? Kind of crowdsource that process from a community. And you may be surprised that some of them may come to you and say, well, you're the guy. Right? And that's a great position to be in to start out that campaign when people are recruiting you to the process. So you got a built-in support base. You know, you're not the lone crazy one. You're not going to charge out there with a flag by yourself and be like, where is everybody?
Yeah, I was thinking about, and we mentioned this story, or one of these. I've told some of you before, I was at Front Sight back in September, and we were doing a fundraising dinner. And so there's like 20 of us in this private room, and everybody goes around the circle and kind of says how they got to know Patriot Academy or why they're there. And this guy gets up and he goes, he said, well, I'm a Constitution coach, and I've been hosting a class in my home, and a commissioner's seat came up, and so we kind of threw it out to the group and said, somebody needs to run for this seat. And they all said, well, you're the one that drafted us into this class, so you're the one that needs to run. So they convinced him to run, and then somebody else in the class said, well, I'll be the sign chairman. Somebody else said, I'll raise money and be the finance chairman. And a few months later, he's elected, and now he's a commissioner. And so he was telling that story, and it just really, it made me think, if you'll just take a step, you may be the catalyst that causes somebody else to run, or it may end up being you that they asked to run. So start with a Constitution class, get one going in your home or at your church. I'd love for you to tell the Biederman story of how he got recruited by somebody that came into his store.
Well, that's just, down the street, Fredericksburg, Texas. And the truth is, Kyle's I call him your average patriotic American, which is he's somebody who thinks government's too big. He's working hard in his community, trying to actually provide for people. He's ran an Ace Hardware dealership for 37 years in Fredericksburg, Texas. He's working hard. He's involved in church and other stuff, but he is not politically engaged, right? So he cares about this stuff, but other than watching Fox News and radio and some other stuff, not Fox News lately, but
Now it's Newsmax,
There you
just
go.
the news,
but
OAN.
But he got approached by somebody who was more active politically locally, Matt Long, who is just a local carpenter and went to Ace Hardware to buy stuff all the time and met Kyle and knew he was a conservative-minded American, and walks into his store and says, hey, our state representative is a really liberal Republican. And the next question Kyle asked him was, who's our state representative? This is a guy who's being recruited to run for a position. He couldn't tell you who the guy is there.
Yeah.
He might not have even been able to tell you whether it was a 4-year term or a 2-year term, but that didn't matter. He was literally the type of person that we want being a citizen legislator.
Right.
So he steps up to run, and 7 months later is the representative-elect of Fredericksburg, New Braunfels, Bernie, an entire Hill Country community, and has been ranked one of the most conservative legislators in Texas since being there, and now is going into his 3rd term. So the point being that you might need to run.
Yeah.
You might know of somebody in your community that you can walk in and literally today couldn't tell you who their state rep, county commissioner, county judge, district attorney, mayor is. But they are the type of person with the network, with the charisma, with the background to jump in. And if you were to help them, they might actually win.
Yeah. Good stuff. So start thinking like that. We got to think beyond this presidential election. Start thinking about what we're going to do on the local level. This is that part where I need to do a disclaimer because I don't usually have people out here with me. All of the disparaging remarks that I'm going to make about all of these people that I normally disparage, these guys have nothing to do with that and probably don't endorse such disparaging remarks. Okay.
And I'm more likely to endorse them than Raz is. We should just disclaim
I'm
that.
just a real squish when it comes.
Right.
Obviously,
So soft.
Right.
But the point is, I probably agree with what you're saying. Raz, if he does, he's just,
Yeah.
I may or may not say something.
That's true.
We'll
That's
see.
true. That's true.
All right, so what I got to get predictions from you guys, not on the presidential thing. I'll definitely come back to that before we close out today. But just in the coming year, I mean, based on what you saw happen in 2020, most people feel like our nation is split down the middle right now. What are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic about the country? What are you feeling in terms of people like Kyle and others that this year woke up and are going to get involved? Just kind of your take on, as we turn the corner into this new year, what you're expecting.
You take that one. I'll come back on it.
So I think the big thing that I'm watching right now is the war going on within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Because the establishment elite are basically trying to make a full, aggressive push to taking the party back to the good old days where they had complete power. They want the George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney Republican Party. And the truth is they've been unable to define the GOP like that, which is the way they want it defined. It's the way that we know the country club prefers it defined.
Right,
That's
right.
back when, wealthy people all wanted to vote Republican because we weren't addressing the cultural issues. We weren't engaging in the battle that's going on that the left is waging on our values and principles. And in Donald Trump and a lot of other Republicans that have grown in their basically control and voice in the party, they've been pushing back. So I think that there's a huge discussion going on, and it's going to happen this year. It's already happening today, but next year is going to be a major battle within the Republican Party of your moderate, centrist, establishment ruling elite trying to re-dominate the party and re-control the message. And you're going to have conservative, constitutional, limited government individuals who say, I don't care what you do, but I want to defend unborn. I want to actually treat immigration like it's an issue worth talking about within our nation. I want to limit government's role, all these executive orders, these mandates, this tyranny. I want to go back against it. And so I think there's going to be a major, major battle that's going to happen that's going to then, look ahead into 2022 and 2024.
Yeah.
Because these battles are going to determine what the standard bear, what our principles are as a party moving forward.
Yeah.
So I'm quite optimistic. And one is a political reason as far as the political reality we have on the policy fights. And the other is looking, I think I see the political and the policy side. That protects. That's a rear guard action for the cultural and spiritual side.
Right.
Like if we want to win this battle long term, it's a cultural and spiritual thing.
Amen.
That's where
The
we
political
have.
part is downstream from.
Yeah,
from
exactly.
even
So
that,
it's
yeah.
like, but we have to have that. We have to have folks like Kyle and Brian and these folks that are fighting the political fights, because that's what protects our flank from just being completely routed.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's not where we win this fight. So we're seeing some really cool things happening from folks being interested, the number of people sign up for the Constitution coaching courses and all of the different educational opportunities we're seeing across the country. People looking and saying, what government are we supposed to have?
Yeah.
How is it supposed to work? Why do we have a government? And what do we believe? Because we've seen from some of the Black Lives Matter protests to defund the police to the way the COVID stuff was handled to the election, so many examples of that bifurcation, and saying, wow, there's really a huge gulf between what some of these groups believe about our fundamental purpose.
Yeah.
Why we're supposed to be here. But we're seeing a lot of people waking up to that and seeing, well, maybe this group of people that were actors that we thought were benign, they're not. And so we should look more deeply at what it is we believe. People saying, I don't know what I believe. But on the political side, what makes me most giddy is you've already started seeing how the Democrats are just going after each other like nobody's business.
Yeah.
The only thing that, like right now, through all this post-election stuff, they're trying to make an enduring enemy, because what they have is they have a coalition built together around a common enemy, and those are some of the worst, some of the most fragile types of coalitions out there. You look at any kind of bit of military history or political history. If your uniting force as an alliance is a common enemy, as soon as the enemy is gone, chaos reigns.
Yeah.
We see that here in Texas with Joe Strauss being out as a speaker. We're seeing that nationally, if he loses the election on the 6th, then what we're going to see is that the Democrats now are going to have control, and they will try to continue to make him and the people that pushed back against Biden's election be the boogeymen.
Right.
The reason they do that is because they know without that, they're going to go after each other like nobody's business. And so I bought a lot of popcorn, and I'm having a lot of fun when you're watching Nancy Pelosi try to herd cats in the House.
Yeah.
It's going to be crazy, the kind of things that they're going to do and the fighting they're going to have against each other.
The first part that you were talking about, we were talking earlier about how important it is to ask the right questions. People are asking questions they've never considered before. What you just said, what kind of people are we? How does our government really work? What are our real values? When you're fat and happy and rich and wealthy as a nation and free, you don't tend to reflect much on those things and think about those things. Right now, people are starting to ask, can government shut my? I mean, they've never seen this. They've shut my business down. They've taken away my livelihood, or they're forcing me to wear a mask, or they're forcing me to get or whatever. They're really being backed against the corner, so that they're finally asking those questions, which I actually think is healthy in the long run, because it's making them, I think, dig deep and say, what am I for? Because now you've got this massive conflict, and they've got to pick a side at some point, whereas in the past they didn't have to pick a side, have to worry about it. So I think that's a healthy thing, that they're asking these questions they've never asked before.
I know I've used this quote in the course, but it's one of my life quotes. But when Abraham Kuyper said, he's Prime Minister of the Netherlands in the early 1900s, was a pastor and theologian, and he said, when principles that run against your deepest convictions begin to win the day, then battles you're calling and peace has become sin. And one of the things you see is that whenever we win, in fact, going back to a mantra people kept on saying for the last 4 years, are you sick and tired of winning yet? There's this idea that...
And the answer is no.
Hey,
I'm not...
So never have been.
Right.
But our culture is declining, right? We're not we are today not experiencing a cultural renewal, but the hope is that we can spark in our country that renewal, because there is a cultural decline happening. Even when we had a president and more Republicans in office that were pushing back against the cultural, we have pillars within society that are working very, very hard. Educational institutions, higher educational institutions, the media, television, all these things that are pushing everybody to the left, while we basically had just a couple politicians that are saying, actually, this is a really bad thing. And then most of the politicians that are just along for the ride.
Yeah.
So I think there's just an opportunity when people say, hey, we've woken up to the reality that our country is in the middle of a battle, and yes, we are going to further engage in it, and the more engaged we are, the better chance we have.
It seems like the other side has known they were at war a lot longer than us. I mean, it feels like right now that much of our side doesn't recognize just how vicious the other side can be, or that the other side has truly become a radical revolution of changing our country into frankly a Marxist, modeled economy and government role, while our side is really still wanting to just play super nice and not really be at war.
I mean, 2 years ago, the Texas legislature, our governor, everyone pushed literally giving higher education institutions in Texas a significant pay raise, an increase in their funding.
Well, because they've done such a good job at training our children to be Marxist. I mean, they've been good at it.
It's an idea. I mean, Raz, you have met with people, you're involved within higher education and helping revolutionize those things, and people investing into the right type of higher education. And I want you to think about the fact that we have a very Republican-dominated state, and all these institutions that are fundamentally teaching a Marxist ideology are being given more money to teach that Marxist ideology.
Well, we're saying defund those universities, but our own people are giving them more money.
So it is an interesting reality that, first and foremost, you have to realize, and this goes back to what I'm looking at in 2021, which is the battle within the Republican Party. I mean, there's a significant amount of people in the Republican Party that aren't at war. Yeah. They're still not at war. I mean, the reality is they don't think we're at war. They're pretty happy. They're doing pretty well. So it's important for us to recognize the difference and say, okay, this guy knows we're at war. This guy doesn't even think we're at war. Going back to when is the right time to run for office, that's when the right time to run for office is.
Yeah, I remember Dinesh D'Souza saying, I was on a panel with him in San Diego in October, and he covers the same subject in Trump Card, but he talked about how, frankly, we always try to play nice, and the other side is chopping us off at the knees, and he used the example of Lincoln in the Civil War in 1863 when we started having black troops for the North. The Confederates were assassinating them when they would capture them, and so he said Lincoln actually signed an executive order that said for every black Union soldier that they execute that's a POW, we execute one Confederate POW. I mean, he signed an executive order to do that. I was shocked. And he said, Lincoln was a moderate man in terms of he wasn't somebody that would be taken to that kind of a reaction, but he was at war and it stopped it. And of course, my response when he said that, we're in front of this massive crowd at this church. I said, Dinesh, what are you suggesting we do here? Can you give me some examples so that we don't go
this a little clearly? Yeah, I don't want this.
I'd like to box this in a little bit here.
Let's
anyway.
correct the liability issue we have.
But the point is you gotta fight. You gotta realize what the tools are that are being used to fight against you.
And I think that's where a lot of people, especially people that are fresh in, they realize, hey, there is a war going on here. There is a battle. They get excited and they don't think about what does making war mean. And the fact is that there's a lot of people that will go for the quick catharsis. They'll start flaming people on Twitter or trying to blow people up on their Facebook or something like that, or just calling names. The harder work to do is maybe have a conversation with your neighbor.
Yeah.
Where you're not screaming at them, you're not yelling at them. The reason why one of the reasons we've had so many of these problems that start with spiritual and cultural problems is that we're not willing to have conversation about those and actually try to convince somebody.
Yeah.
We were talking, before we kicked off about with Chris Voss and Never Split the Difference, some of the negotiation training. That's about empathy, right? So how do you get somebody to change their mind? Do you do it by yelling at them? Or do you do it by asking them questions and trying to understand what they believe? Now, when we start talking about politicians, it's a lot easier to figure out, okay, this guy knows where he's at and he's going to do the wrong thing, and our one solution is to beat him at the ballot box. The other part of that, though, is there's a whole lot of those people out there, both the people on the left and the right because there's people on both sides of that don't understand there's a war going on. There's people that vote Democrat every day of the week and long after they're dead that don't realize there's a battle going on.
Yeah.
And they just think it was what it was back in the day, or they're keeping their head down, being someone like Kyle back in the day, but they were on the other side. So how do we convince them? Well, that's actually where the hard work comes in. That's where we each got to have conversations as they come along with people that we know and love, and be willing to empathize, to understand where they're coming from. And once we do that, it buys us the opportunity to share wisdom in a non-confrontational manner.
Darn it, Raz, you're making it a lot harder for me to sit here on the porch and just scream on Facebook. I mean, I needed to hear this in all seriousness, because we have ended up in our own echo chambers where we're not having those conversations with each other very much. And I have really, I think we've gotten to this frustration point.
Yeah.
Where we do, I'm guilty of it. I just have reached this level where I've said enough, I'm done with this group of people. And so I only lambast them, where there are some that you can still negotiate with and convince.
I think I'll draw a slight distinction between often what y'all are talking about. So, Jesus was really hypocritical of, the Pharisees.
Jesus was hypocritical?
Yeah, Jesus was hypocritical.
Jesus
We
was
gotta-
very
we gotta, like,
critical.
take a break.
That was
gotta
Luke,
stop.
not Raz,
Theology.
and Rick. We just want to be sure that we make it
Jesus was very critical
of the
Pharisees,
hypocritical.
of the hypocritical Pharisees.
Gotcha.
And so what does that tell us? It tells us that, it's the leadership that are often, I think, worthy of criticism. But when then they would bring him, one woman who was a prostitute and go, hey, we're going to take her out, and he'd go, wait a second, you who are without sin, throw the first stone. So it shows us, I think, to Raz's point, that there are a lot of people that we know that voted for Joe Biden, okay, that actually are not part of, and I always try to do this distinction too. When we talk about the left and the radical left and what they're coming for, that does not constitute every single person who voted in a direction that you disagree with. In fact, there's a lot of empathy and communication that can actually pull those people over. What you and I are often talking about are the people that are telling Texans, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fight for you. And then they get elected and they don't actually do it, right? So that's a little different than I think even what Raz is saying, which is, hey, we've got to actually, if you want to run for office, guess what? Going around yelling, and we'll talk about this in our course, but going around yelling is not going to get you elected. So you actually have tactics. You have to go meet these people, know what they want, care about. So that's like a community level thing versus an accountability of public officials, which I think is different.
Sounds like a lot of discernment there too, right?
I think so. And I think we need, as individuals, we have to default towards that having the conversation side. Yeah. Why would somebody have a conversation with you about and ask you a genuine question about why do you believe the role of government should be limited? If they look at your Facebook and it's you just blowing up everybody and basically screaming at everybody all day long. If that's been your pattern, they're not going to want to have a conversation with you.
Right.
You're not making yourself someone who has the ability and the standing to actually to coach someone. So it's one thing, like you said, to do that, to have those conversations with elected officials, be like, hey, you've lost all political capital and moral capital in my eyes, and I will block walk all day long and donate, and I will do whatever I can to beat you. And we can let them have it at town halls and that kind of thing. But I feel like that is trickled down on both sides it's got so loud that it's driving people out of the conversation, and people are just throwing their hands up and be like, the heck with this. I want no part. And unless we make ourselves people that are easy to talk to and that seem reasonable to people who are disengaged, how do we expect to evangelize if they want to just tune us out?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm probably tuned out by most people out there at this point over the last 6 weeks. Actually, this would be a great opportunity. Let's have a genuine conversation then about what could take place in the next 2 days, because I think we have even some disagreement among the three of us as far as how it should play out, and we have some people that we respect a lot on both sides of what's going to happen on January 6th. I respect Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley a lot. They're going to object. I respect Chip Roy a lot. He's not going to object. And so, I have taken the position up until now, and maybe I'll change my mind, that anyone that does not object to what has clearly been the breaking of state law and the Constitution in at least 4 of these 7 states, if you don't object at all, then you're signing off on the lawlessness. Now, I have a hard time ascribing that to a Chip Roy, right? I mean, he's clearly a great attorney, and he's clearly looked at this closely. I completely disagree with his summation and his decision, but I respect him, and so it does make my conversation a little bit different than it would be with a John Cornyn or a Mitt Romney, who I see as sellouts and don't see them coming alongside us on this battle. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Help temper me on this so that I take these steps a little bit more.
Well, if you're trying to be tempered, then Raz is going to have to be the one.
Luke is not the one to ask. Raz is.
If I'm tempering you, you are so far off. No,
Go for it. Feed the fire.
I'm going to temper. I'm going to feed the fire.
Yeah,
okay, I can feed the fire. No, so I think the question I ask myself when looking at this stuff, one, it's why I'm much more interested in your county commissioner, your county judge, your state representative, these other things, going back to what we're even here to do. I think we can get so into the federal side that we don't realize all the opportunities are down here. So I like to stay down here as much as possible. So when I look at the federal level, I'm asking myself, why do people want certain action taken? And so in D.C., and this goes back to attitude reflects leadership, the Republican Party has not had a strong agenda at all, really, for a significant portion of time. Trump showed up and actually said, I want to push some cultural things. I want to advance the ball. And all of a sudden, Republicans started getting on board now that he's out of the picture, as many of them are wanting to go back to, the Republican good old days. And honestly, but if you think about what were the good old days 10 years ago in the GOP on a federal level, what was it? What did we have? What did we push? What did we advocate for?
Win?
Nothing. Yeah. We took over in 2010 because Obamacare passed. Massive wave. We took over the huge majorities. Guess what? This election cycle, a bunch of Republicans, including John Cornyn, were running on Obamacare.
Yeah.
John Cornyn spent millions of dollars saying, we need to make sure that pre-existing conditions are covered in all these different areas. What is he doing? He's literally running on those same policies. So what does that mean? It means that our refusal to actually engage in the battle has lost ground on all these levels. So now you come to January 6th, and I think the average patriotic American, one says, I don't trust the institutions, which they don't have a reason to trust the institutions. And so now they can easily say, hey, I just want someone to fight for me.
Right.
And a lot of public officials are saying, hey, I'm going to draw a line. Ted Cruz has said, I want an emergency audit conducted, which hurts the narrative of somebody who just wants to say it's done. Right. And we talked a little bit about which states should not be included. Should New Mexico be included? Pennsylvania? I'm not the expert to ask on that. But I think the reason the average red-blooded American is saying, please stand up for me, is because they're asking politicians who have been failing them to just show them that they have some fight in them.
Yeah.
So now you have people, of course, like Mitt Romney and John Cornyn, who haven't been fighting for you for a long time. So guess what? They're probably not likely to step up. And most of the people...
and been undermining the conservative movement for years behind the scenes.
So most of those people who have been fighting for you are stepping up and being counted. There are going to be a couple exceptions. And I think you should be willing to at least read why somebody might object to electors, to say, does this sound like, to your point, a John Cornyn who fundamentally doesn't even understand the Constitution? Or does it sound like somebody who's thought through it and who can make a cogent argument to say, here is my reasoning behind not voting to object on January 6th. And it could be that you say, hey, some of those people have a pretty good perspective. But there's going to be a lot of Republicans who refuse to object because the truth is they kind of are happy that Trump's going away.
Right.
And the swamp can go back to being swampy.
Right.
One of my biggest frustrations of the last month and a half has been how poorly I think our side has handled the chaos of post-election.
Yeah.
And this is from the president and his team on down. We'd be having a much different conversation if there had been a much better organized legal battle from the president's team, which was this hard to foresee, that we'd have states that were changing laws or that we'd have
knew it was coming, right?
This was one of the most easily predictable things, and I frankly expected better from the president as far as organization of the legal battle.
Yeah, I agree with that totally.
My mind has been boggled. Some of the people like Linwood and others that have been part of the team, or at least they have not been pushed away, saying, no, not on our team.
No, and he's somebody who I praised for what he did with Kyle Rittenhouse, getting Kyle Rittenhouse out of jail. But man, the stuff he's putting out and telling people not to vote in Georgia, I mean, come on.
I mean, and that was, there's been so much chaos. There's not been, and even some of the president's tweets and stuff, retweeting things that are just, some of them I've looked into and just don't seem to have a base in fact. That leads to so much chaos, and it's be so easy for the left to deride people that are making a principled decision to object. It makes them easy to deride.
We gave them fodder.
And it's really, really hard right now to convince anybody that is not an absolute partisan in this situation that they should pay any attention whatsoever to it.
Yeah.
And that was all. It's so much spent capital. If, on the other hand, you had a good legal team put in place and a good legal effort that was organized to some degree ahead of time, and you're able to actually from the president's team on down, so hey, just in a deliberate fashion, here's what's going on. Here's what we can prove. Here's what we think, and this is what we're looking into.
Yeah.
But instead, you have all this craziness going on.
Right.
And there's so many obvious conspiracy theories that are so easy to debunk. You've got people talking about how the Nashville bomber thing, and these things it's crazy.
And then when you give any, if you join in that part at all, then they make it sound like everything you've said is crazy. So you haven't had, and I hate to be the old guy here, but I don't even know how old y'all were in 2000. But with the Bush Gore thing, James Baker was the not poster child. What's the word I'm looking for? He was the front guy.
Yeah.
He was the one that every press conference, everything about the whole Florida recount went through him. So you had that one voice. And they kind of got to that point with Giuliani and Jenna Ellis at some point, and she was pretty good. But Giuliani is, I mean, and I like him for a lot of things, but I dislike him for other things. And he definitely is a voice of chaos. I mean, he did create, so it made it difficult. And then it was, and I get it. I mean, the president had a harder job than Bush had in 2000 because it wasn't one state. It was all these states, and we didn't even know for sure where it all happened initially. So it was harder.
But we knew what those battlegrounds were going to be.
Yeah.
We knew what some of the tightest elections would be. You know, in 2000, Ted Cruz, he had been working with the campaign, but he was literally on deck along with teams of lawyers that went across the country that on election day they were deployed, some of them, and the rest were sitting there ready to get tickets to go to wherever the hotspots were, to go and watch and monitor individual election and polling locations.
Right.
These are things that have been done before by Republican campaigns.
Yeah.
This should not. I am genuinely interested in the future to find out what all this looked like.
Right.
Because it's hard for me to imagine how this is not the result of some significant chaos.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with that at all. I mean, it doesn't change how bad the situation is. Doesn't change. I think it's obvious to everybody this thing was, it was stolen, in my opinion, not even by the fraud, but by the using COVID as an excuse. These governors that acted like dictators all year long said, well, why not be a dictator with the election? I'm going to change the election law at the last minute to benefit my team.
Well, in courts, lawfare is really the biggest area that I've seen pointed to is changing the election.
Exactly.
From Pennsylvania and the courts deciding what, extending the dates, changing signature verification rules. These are all things that you can say, okay, well, this was both legal and it was stolen.
Right.
But once again, we've been seeing Democrats do that for years.
Right.
We knew they would be doing this. Why weren't these people that are holding hearings and saying that we need to challenge electors, why weren't they changing election laws 2 years ago?
Yeah.
We're finding stuff to, I mean, this is
what Mark Levin
stuff.
pointed out so well back in October. He said, Pennsylvania legislators, if you don't stop this right now, we're going to have chaos. You have the responsibility. You have the constitutional authority. The Constitution absolutely gives you the authority over electors. Call yourselves into session right now and solve this problem and deal with it.
Yeah.
And frankly, what's really happening at this point, because the lack of leadership on Republicans' part, Kemp in Georgia, I mean, you go down the line, in all of these states where these problems happen, you had Republican leadership that could have solved this problem constitutionally, clearly done their job, and now everybody's asking these congressmen to solve the problem that they should have solved in the first place, right? If the legislators had done their job, then it would be a clear path right now on January 6th. They didn't. Well, some of them did, some of them wanted to, but you don't have any of them that had an official legislative session to do it. It's, these rogue meetings of legislators, and so it's a confusing mess. And so it does put Ted Cruz and Chip Roy and all these people in an incredibly difficult situation. I'll say this from a legal perspective. There isn't clear guidance at this point without the legislators doing their job, with the courts refusing. No one has heard the merits of any of these cases. Not a single court in the country has actually looked at what happened. They've all used technicalities, standing, and I agree with Louis Gohmert. If he doesn't have standing as a member of Congress to determine how the 12th Amendment is going to apply to these guys when there's objections, then who in the world does? So it's just been a total failure on the part of the courts. They've been cowards. The one time they should do something, normally you hear me saying the courts shouldn't be doing something because they're outside their jurisdiction. Defending the Constitution is the one thing they should do, and they haven't done it. So the courts have failed us. The state legislators have failed us. And that's why now everybody's putting all the pressure on those members of Congress and, frankly, on Mike Pence. I mean, we're literally saying to the vice president, we're going to ask you to do something that only Jefferson, Nixon, and Gore did, which is unilaterally accept or reject electors. And that's a tough spot to be in. I believe he has the constitutional authority to do so, but my goodness, you talk about, being responsible for potentially changing the outcome of the election. That's a tough spot, right?
You pointed out that, and this is something that conservatives understand the importance of, but so many Republicans don't, that, hey, setting bad precedent is very dangerous and gets us in really bad situations. I remember when the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton went to the Supreme Court of Texas, or not the Supreme Court, but the U.S. Supreme Court to say, hey, these other states violated election law, right, in the course of their elections, so you need to turn them down. But unfortunately, our own governor, Greg Abbott, and his Secretary of State, who he appoints and governs over, violated election law at the same time.
Absolutely.
So here's what's so funny, right? Now you have Texas saying, hey, these states violated election law, so please don't listen to what they're doing. And you're going, So did your governor.
I filed suit
And
against Greg
yes,
Abbott over that.
you and many other people said, what are you doing?
Right.
You can't just
You're
say
not- yep.
people are allowed to do X, Y, or Z. That's in code. You have to call the legislature in and have them pass a law
Exactly.
to change the way election law is. No, I just think single-handedly I'm going to do it. Well, then all of a sudden the election goes a different way, and Ken Paxton is having to go to court to make an argument, and unfortunately he can't say, hey, Texas did it the constitutional way, the way that respects the rule of law, and this state didn't. Instead, he has to say, I don't like that this state did it, the same thing that my state did. And by the way, it's a good opportunity to point out, Ken Paxton defended Greg Abbott in those situations.
he did.
So then you go, wait a
Absolutely.
second. The sitting Texas Attorney General, which is what I think this is where Raz's point of just saying, we don't want to just feed the chaos, right?
There's a lot of theater going on.
Yeah.
Well, I think Paxton is a prime example of complete theater.
Where and in point being that he, would defend the governor when he's changing election law as a governor, and then complain to the Supreme Court that these other states didn't do it.
He's in a situation legally where he is in a bad spot with the Republican base. He would have a very hard time being reelected, even convincing people that he should run again right now. So for him, there's a very clear who benefits. Kay Bono situation with why is he filing this suit? He gets a very clear benefit just by filing it.
Yeah.
Even my reading, I don't agree on the standing issue. It seems I have a very hard time seeing how the state had the actual standing to do that, and I'm desperately worried about the kind of precedent that sets if that had been, and when you've got even folks like Clarence Thomas who are saying, hey, we should have heard more about this, but you don't have standing, that it's really hard for me to say that we got it. Yet another area where I'm like, hey, if this was a big deal, the people who have standing should have filed the suit, and you can't find anybody.
Well, see, my problem from a legal perspective is if they were consistent in that, if we truly had federalism and the federal courts stayed out of these issues all the time, I would be saying, yeah, absolutely, I agree with them intellectually that we didn't have standing. But if we didn't have standing now, then why did the federal courts intervene in all these states and say you can't have voter ID, you got to do this? I mean, we have Fourth Circuit decisions.
But that's the federal courts. Their job, their only job in elections is to basically say, are the states breaking the Constitution? Are they disenfranchising people, that kind of thing? And those suits are coming from people, at least the standing is established by people that are actual voters or constituents of those states.
But they haven't even heard those cases. I mean, they're kicking those out on technicalities or pushing them down the road. That's the whole thing. It's like somebody make a decision somewhere because the chaos continues because there is no...
But so many of these cases that have been filed have been such an awful mashup. You've got people, like the other day in one of the Georgia things, people were talking about the turnout and comparing turnout in Buckhead, the part of Atlanta, they're confusing the city that's 100 miles or so from Atlanta with the community and like mixing up voter numbers in their, I think in a lawsuit, but at least in a press conference. And he got one of Sidney Powell's lawsuits was talking about some stuff in Michigan when she was listing counties from Minnesota. These are like, it's been really easy to throw a lot of these out on technicalities because people are doing awful legal work.
But I'm sure there is some of that.
Yeah, but I think the Rick's point too is that, okay, we can point to the weakest lawsuits within all of them filed, but none of them have been considered on any level because the federal judiciary as a whole does not want this in their court.
They don't want it. It's the same as the COVID
There
fascism.
is no desire.
Why has there not been a Supreme Court decision saying you do not have a compelling interest to tell people they can't leave their home? They just don't want to make any of the decisions. And Roberts was not even willing, on some of the easiest decisions to be made. So that's the problem I have is that it's a hot potato. And the problem is the hot potato is our future. And they're all passing it around and nobody is following. There are plenty of interpretations of the 12th Amendment and the historical precedent for them to be able to do some of the things that are being proposed for January 6th. And I guess my argument would be to a guy like Chip Roy, I would say, okay, look, this is not a high school debate. We're not in a situation where everybody's just playing nice and looking at every little rule. We are at war, and there is historical precedent for you to do what we're asking you to do. Other congressmen have done this, and why not use every possible tool at our fingertips instead of hanging your hat on all these little technicalities?
So what comes to mind on there, and this is both a defensive chip and I think a really important thing that we have to keep in mind, because we're saying, hey, we shouldn't play by Marcus of Queensberry rules if we're at war. On the other hand, I think we have to know where that line's drawn.
Right.
And if you haven't seen the movie A Man for All Seasons, you got to see it. It's about Sir Thomas More. And there comes this point in the movie, in his life, where there was the guy that was working for him that eventually would lie about him and lead to his own death. That Sir Thomas knew he was a bad guy. His wife, his daughter, his son-in-law, they all knew this is a bad character. And they're all coming to him saying, Sir Thomas, you basically got to do something about this guy. He's a bad man. He's gonna hurt you. He asked him, what has he done wrong? And he said, well, nothing. He's a bad man. This is important. He's gonna hurt us. He's a bad man. It's like, well, what should I charge him with? And they kind of go through this process, and this very rash future son-in-law, they basically have this thought exercise where he says, so what would you do to get at the devil? It's like, I'd tear down every law in the land, make up whatever excuse, do anything, basically. There's no rule I wouldn't break. There's no law I wouldn't tear down to get at the devil. He said, well, where will you hide once you've torn down every law, broken every excuse and every rule, and the devil turns on you? Where will you hide? We have to be very prudent, exercise a great degree of prudence, even in the midst of an incredibly chaotic and highly emotional, highly charged situation, to make sure the rules that we may be breaking, the precedent we may be setting, is not destructive.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I'm suggesting we're not breaking any rules. In other words, I totally disagree with Chip Roy's summation that he doesn't have anything, that he's not even willing to ask for an investigation here. So I think the brilliance of what Ted Cruz said has done is he said, I'm not saying that there was fraud or that these electors shouldn't be accepted. I'm saying we should at least answer the questions and ask the questions and answer the questions. Give us a chance to see the evidence. Now there are some that are saying that's not a role at all for the federal government. But if there's no role there at all, and that's really what Chip's saying, if there's no role for the Congress in accepting or rejecting electors, then why did, and when I say Congress, I mean the federal government, then why did the founders put that in the 12th Amendment? Why have this opening and counting of ballots in the presence of the Congress and the vice president do that if there is no role at all? And what do you do? I mean, would he do this any different if he had two slates of electors that were signed? I mean, who would it have to be signed by for him to feel like now it's an 1876 situation? Because in 1876 you had three sets of electors, and some signed by governor, some signed by nobody. I mean, that's really more like what we're in the situation of doing. Do you just let the media decide? I mean, is that essentially what we're saying, that whoever the media decided to accept for those two slates of electors, or does Congress?
I think that's the point of where the root of frustration, and some people don't see why so many Americans are not taking the, just sit back and settle for whatever CNN, MSNBC, Fox News are telling you the results are the results. And I think to some extent that sometimes that lack of unity, you talked about a lack of a central spokesperson and lack of unity within a coherent message, hurts, because the truth is, and personally, I think this just points to the battle that's going on in the Republican Party. Like I said, my position is there are going to be some people that don't object, that have very strong constitutional, thoughtful arguments that they're making, even if you disagree with them, right? So intent is prior to content, just what are you trying to do with this? But most of the Republicans, and I think this, I have no problem saying this, the vast majority of the Republican elected officials who are going to not object, doesn't mean all of them, but the vast majority of them are, honestly, you will find them amongst the list of the worst performing Republicans in Congress, the worst voting Republicans in Congress, the most liberal Republicans in Congress. They're all not going to, because they want to take our party back to their type of party. And
okay, so here's from a strategy and tactical perspective. Those guys have all been given cover now by Chip Roy and Thomas Massie, who are great conservatives, who now they're going to be able to say, look, even these guys aren't on
I can see that. I guess I'm not as concerned about it, just because I think that the people within those different states, like, if you're somebody, we all know Chip Roy because we're huge fans of the guy, and he's amazing. And Thomas Massie, we're like the most engaged. The average guy on the street, he wants to know where you stand on this issue and where he's going to be with you on it. So I feel like as a whole, though, it's important to recognize the fact that there are a lot of people that are not objecting, and they couldn't tell you why. Or they're going to make up an excuse like John Cornyn does, which shows a misunderstanding of, like, even what the Constitution says, right? So
let me switch gears a little bit here. You mentioned that it's just theater. Is that all bad, right? Because I hear that from some of my other close friends that are like, I just don't support it because it's just theater. But sometimes theater is important, isn't it?
I think you can make that argument. I think so much of the time in this case, when you look at people like Pax and others who as a political operative, somebody that studies this stuff, I look at it as like, they don't care. It's like, and this is a complete guess on my part, a judgment. Yeah. But I look at the actions of so many people, a lot of people in these legislatures that are holding hearings they're not taking actual legal testimony or turning stuff over to courts. I just see theater everywhere. But it's not the kind where these people are actually doing it for a purpose to try to elucidate some truth, right? Theater, the idea of it, where we see truth is when it puts an example in front of us, when it maybe makes something absurd, but in a way that elucidates and shines a light on something important or a character trait. I think what we're seeing right here is a number of people using a circumstance to try to make it look like there's something they're not. They're trying to say, hey, I'm fighting for Trump. I want to stand up. And they're going to use this as the reason you should reelect them next election cycle when they don't have a conservative bone in their body. Yeah. They fall actually I think in a number of cases into that category that you're talking about, because they may be cloaking themselves and I did everything I could to fight for Trump. I said I'd object to electors and I did everything I could. But did they actually vote?
I got you. Okay, so in that case, I agree. I hate that too.
It makes my blood boil.
It's the same as right now, Governor Abbott saying I'm opening Texas when in fact he's closing Texas. That's grandstanding and theater, like you're saying. I would totally agree with you on that. On the other hand, if it's somebody that's saying we're going to lose, we don't have the votes, we're going to lose, but we think the American people need to know how shoddy this whole thing was. Mm-hmm. Is that different?
I think those people are rare right now.
Yeah.
I think that they are far outnumbered by the people who just see, hey, you know what, this is going to mean nothing, and I don't actually care, but it's going to save me a lot of heat and a lot of money in a primary race because I'm going to be able to run ads saying that I did everything I could to stop Biden, and they're just be all their mailers, and to where I'm going to insulate myself from primary challenges.
But what do you think about people like Gohmert, who I think genuinely believes
or
what
Ted
he
Cruz or Josh Hawley and some people
he raised really good constitutional issues in that lawsuit. I'm actually pushing for a constitutional amendment after this that would clear up this process. It would actually say, okay, if you have a situation like this with multiple electors or for whatever reason, kind of like the 1887 law, which is a mess, but at least if one of each from each chamber objects, then we're going to split and debate it, and then when we come back together, if both sides reject, it's rejected. If both sides accept, it's accepted. But if they split, the vice president has to break that tie. And at some point, you've got to have a way to have that outcome. But also clear up that the 12th Amendment says the House has to vote by state. That's what it says. So if they're going to go in and debate this on rejecting or accepting electors, they got to vote by state, not by 435 members. So that's the constitutional amendment that I'm going to be pushing after this is all said and done. I can't even remember where I was going with that. What was I saying before that?
But I'll take that probably the direction you didn't intend for it, and look at the fact that we need to do some serious electoral work, right? We in the last couple of years in Texas with election fraud as well as some of the election reforms, we've seen how big of a problem this is.
Yes.
And
this is where the real work is going to, like you said, the hard work.
There are some significant problems. There's a lot of stuff with the legislatures not insulating themselves from some of the court action and not clarifying some of that. There's a lot of areas where legislators have to do a lot to make sure that our elections are better protected. Because there's a reason why so many people are angry and frustrated. It's because even a lot of these conspiracy theories, you and I might be able to look at it and be like, well, I know what that is because I've seen it before. It happens every election cycle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really, really questionable stuff that needs to be clarified. People should have confidence in their elections, and whether there's smoke or fire or both, a lot of people don't, and we need to really reinforce that.
I think Tim Barton has made this argument really well that one of the positive things coming out of this whole thing is that corruption the light is being shown on a lot of these things, a lot of these problems, and so at least it's going to give us the momentum going into these legislative sessions all over the country. For election integrity laws that can tighten that up and prevent a lot of those things.
Look, in Texas, our Secretary of State, at the direction of Governor Abbott, violated Texas election law, and election integrity legislation passed the Texas Senate and died in the Republican-controlled Texas House of Representatives.
This was last session.
Just last session.
Yeah.
They failed to pass election integrity reform. Not that would have even fixed everything, but would have helped fix some of the process. So I think that there can be a demand for any state controlled by a Republican legislature to say you have to deliver election integrity legislation.
Is this a fair statement then to say to our viewers tonight, if you're hacked off right now and you're hollering for these congressmen and senators to do those things, are you willing to go testify at your state legislature this spring to ask for election integrity? In other words, saying We can't just blame them. We've got to fix the problems in our own backyard.
Yes. And don't let them buy you off by having a hearing and saying how they're fighting to get Trump elected and they're fighting to try to suss out all this bad stuff. If they're not willing to go back in a couple months during the legislative session and fight for real election integrity reform, then it was theater and they were lying to you.
I think that's a good example.
So I want both.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want the theater. I still think that there is a constitutional way. It's down to about 10% now for Trump to still win if they follow the Constitution and the rule of law. And I think the Supreme Court has enough in front of them that they could still come out with a ruling after January 6th. So there's some ways that could still happen. I think they should fight whether they can win or not. It's not about Trump. It's not about Biden. It's about the Constitution and the rule of law. But what y'all are talking about is much bigger, and that is what do we do as citizens after all of this is said and done, after January 6th, after January 20th. Our work is important. I mean, this is what we're talking about here is the future of the republic. If we don't restore faith in the elections, I don't even know how to describe what could happen at that point.
No. If you're a county judge or a county commissioner, you're going to have direct oversight over how your county conducts its election every single time, right?
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons to take the course that we're putting out and run for office, run for local office. And if you're at the legislative level, if you're an activist within your state, reaching out to your state representative and state senator and not saying, what is your position on January 6th? That's your congressman, that's your U.S. senator.
Right.
The question to your state is, hey, are you going to pass election integrity? And I want a list of where you could find that. Also, you're going to have, those same congressmen going to them. And even if they say, well, I don't know that this is the role, great. Can you please publicly support election integrity in our state during the next cycle? So there's so many steps that you can continue to push. And one of the things I know Raz and you and I are all concerned about is sometimes every date in front of us becomes the win or lose that decides the future of the republic, which is often just the way our mindset works. And look, we're emotional beings. And so we look at the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. All of us have survived many different battles, right? And we're going to keep
Wins
fighting
and losses.
after January 6th. And so I think that's a huge thing to push. If you're in Texas, I will say Direct Action Texas is one of the entities that probably is the best, most informed entity within Texas on election integrity specifically.
I was
They've
going to
worked
ask
in
you that question. You read my mind. Because I was like, election integrity, the left is going to co-opt that term.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
They're going to have a slate of bills where they say this is election integrity. Yes. Nobody has to have a voter ID. You get to start voting in June for a November election. That's going to be their kind of
Absolutely.
So you're say it again. Direct
Action Texas,
Direct
DAT.
Action Texas.
But if you go to Direct Action Texas, if you just Google it, Direct Action Texas, you'll find their website. Sign up for their email alerts. They're literally going to be informing Texans during the session on exactly what's happening, what bills have been filed, and they've done so in a way that actually peels the curtain back to whatever Republicans or Democrats are telling you. They're a conservative organization who's going to push election integrity and let you know what's really happening. So Republicans won't be able to pass what you've seen them often do, which is kind of window dressing. This is the election integrity bill. No, we want to know what actually did happen and what the problems are that have been corrected.
We didn't plan for this at all, and so I just love putting you all on the spot. But what are some of the most important things to do for election integrity?
So again, I do think the reason I'm going to tell you to go to Direct
Trey, are you watching for questions, by the way? Okay, good. We are going to get to some questions.
Okay. Very quickly, I would just say that first and foremost, I would go to Direct Action Texas because one of the things that I've learned is that I'm not always the policy expert in every single issue, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to just spout off here are 3 things that could change right away that would fix it. I do think that people have pointed out that much of the fraud often happens within mail-in ballots.
Right.
And we know that in Texas. We know that the people who have been put in prison, the people who have been prosecuted have been people who collect election basically mail-in ballot harvesting and other operations like that are illegal. People that have gone in to vote and realized that somebody else already got a ballot mailed to them for that person and sent it in to vote for them. So with us knowing that has happened in Texas, we've got to have bigger restrictions on who can vote by mail. And I think we should naturally say, hey, we want less and less people to vote by mail because what we know is if you're going in, there's a lot more integrity. There's been a lot of concerns about the Dominion systems. They're not used in Texas, so that's not something that applies directly. But one of the things that has been pushed at different levels, and again, I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details because I don't want to speak out of turn, but just making sure that there's a paper audit trail that's auditable so that after there's, and this goes back to Raz's concern, after there is any contest on an election, there's an easy way to audit the process and say, these machines say this, here's the numbers, it all matches up.
The big difference between your dad's recount and my recount was there's no paper trail when we did your dad's, just computer printouts, right?
Yep.
And so when we did mine, we were able to go in and look at every single ballot. So I lost by 20 votes out of 30,000. My opponent and I both, with our teams, looked at every single ballot. I ended up winning by 36 votes. He could have done a second recount. He said, "Why would I do that, Rick? You won. It's over." We both. Nobody claimed the other one cheated. Nobody. I mean, it was done. You've got to have transparency.
Yep.
You've got to have verification, and then you've got to have legal remedies in case those things don't happen. Now, I would argue a lot of what's happening now are the legal remedies to those things not happening
and I
in
think
the
that's
national
your
election.
point.
But at the local level, those are things we need. Voter ID, I think, is important. A paper trail. You got to have an actual ballot you can go back to and count, and then reducing those mail-in ballots. Those
And your
reasons.
point with the legal remedies is still the fact that the court system the court system as a whole has not wanted to address the COVID tyranny. I mean, literally, the Supreme Court ruled on Austin's tyranny, but they've ruled in favor of Governor Abbott's tyranny every single chance they've gotten.
Right.
With I think only John Devine.
John Devine's the only
is the
champion
only
we've
one
had
who
on-
has said, "Hey, the governor is acting in a tyrannical manner, and we as the court system should be put those branches in check." But what we've realized, I actually thought about this. I would really like there to be one Democrat on the Texas Supreme Court. Okay, and here's why. I want the people of Texas to see how often your Republican Supreme Court justices would vote with that
Democrat.
because they would
Absolutely.
vote with him all the time.
No
I'm like,
doubt.
it actually is bad for us that we have all Republicans because they can vote wrong and nobody knows the difference,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
They know, you know the court very well, and we know that it's a spectrum of ideological perspective. So I think the court has basically punted as much as possible.
No, they have.
This standing position that they've taken in a lot of different cases, not just with the election, but with the COVID tyranny and everything, it's been, hey, you don't have standing, you don't have standing, you don't have standing, lawmakers don't have standing, business owners don't have standing. It's whatever they can.
They're afraid to make a decision.
That's
Everybody's afraid to make a decision. And we used to call them courts of justice. It meant something. You were looking for justice. Now it's just all the technicalities. Okay, questions. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we got quite a few good ones.
I didn't mean to cut y'all off.
fine.
Did y'all want
No,
to go any
it's
further
good.
on the election thing?
Raz had run out of good stuff to say, so we need to move on.
I did that a while ago.
Hey, just look at that shot, man. I mean, Rick even made y'all look good, and that's not easy.
Oh, that's
I
a
mean,
hard job,
That's
man.
not easy.
They don't know
Good
all
work,
the
man.
makeup I have on right now. This is fake hair. This is not even
Most
real.
of it. Most of it is.
You guys introduce yourselves again real quick. We had a lot of people jump in late. But
I'm Luke Macias.
That's a good deal. You would want to take credit for that.
would.
I get that.
I would.
I'm Luke Macias. You can go to lukemacias.com to read a little bit more about me. Follow the podcast that I put out every week and do some other stuff like that. Political consultant here in Texas, work for the most conservative elected officials in our state and local level, state level, all sorts of stuff. That's me.
Raz Schaefer. I'm a Patriot Academy grad. You forgot to mention that.
I'm a Patriot Academy graduate.
From Stephenville, Texas. I've been involved in politics since I was 12. Went to Hillsdale College and got back to Texas and out of Michigan winters as soon as I could. And so I got to work with a lot of guys like Luke and many of his clients over the years, training candidates, helping elect good ones, raising money for nonprofit organizations, and trying to coach a lot of folks. You can go to raz.us to find out a little bit more about me and figure out how to reach out. mycampaigncoach.com is got some of the campaign coaching podcasts and articles and stuff up there that I've been involved with. Had Luke on a bunch of times and got 100-some hours of interview content with candidates, elected officials, consultants, all kinds of folks that work in the space, trying to help share some information about how good people can get elected and make some difference.
These guys have a wealth of experience and information. And y'all are, how old, you mind saying how old you are?
Yeah, 30.
30?
34.
Or I don't mind.
Don't.
That's just because you're the youngest guy.
Ah, it's true.
30 and 34. And even at that age, y'all both have, so you started at 12, so 22 years.
I have significantly more experience than he does. That's what we're coming down to.
That's
You
true.
started at 17? 16?
I started at 16, so
16.
I've got 14.
And 14 years of experience. Okay, so decades of experience. And gosh, I don't even know if y'all have ever added up how many races you've been involved in at some level.
A lot.
It would be probably
Yeah, a bunch.
probably hundreds between certainly between the three of us. Anyway, they are transferring a ton of that information to you in a really easy 8-module course that we're going to be releasing at patriotacademy.com. Just a great way for you to decide. Should
Don't
I
give
run
a date.
for Huh?
Don't give
Don't
a
give.
date.
I won't give a date. Not only should you possibly run for office, but even if you're not thinking about running for office, you could take this course so that you get a better idea of who to recruit in your community. And all of us, no matter what you do for a living, no matter what your background, all of those things, all of us need to be good citizens. And so you have a role in choosing who those leaders are in your community. So I am so stoked about this campaign coach thing. I mean, I think you guys are about to ignite a fire across the country. I mean, we've had hundreds of people asking for this, and thousands of people that I know deep down need it and want it. And so anyway, you guys are onto something here.
How many questions are we going to try to get through?
I don't know. How many you want to get through? You got to get home to your
We
wives,
can
don't
do
you?
rapid. Let's answer.
Let's do
these
rapid
things.
fire. What do we got?
Actions against the court right now.
Actions again in the court right now?
No, like how do you pull back the court right now?
Well,
Or get them to take action one way or the other.
yeah, so I can go off on this one next week when I don't have these guys here to talk about this other stuff. But, bottom line is, as I said earlier, we talk in our Constitution classes about how the court has been outside its jurisdiction. Constitutionally, we really limited the court in what they would do. They're supposed to be the weakest branch, all of those things. But the one thing they are supposed to do is defend the Constitution and actually uphold the rule of law. And unfortunately, I don't think you can't make them do that. What you can do in some states like ours is run good people for those judicial offices. In a lot of states, it's not. You don't even get to elect your judges. But it's also going to take a mindset change. And frankly, a lot of you out there, the young people that are watching, choose to go to law school, be the next generation of attorneys and judges. But get people educated on the Constitution, and what the Constitution actually allows for and requires of the court, so that you can ask the right questions when people are running for office. So
I'm not just here to plug my podcast, but we did an interview. But I will. But we did an interview with Matt Rinaldi and Josh Hammer, two very conservative lawyers, about the future of the conservative
both
legal
brilliant guys,
yeah,
absolutely.
About the future of the conservative legal movement after the Bostock ruling, because you have people like Neil Gorsuch who can come out with very leftist ideological rulings
Right.
that go completely away from the rule of law. And so then you go, okay, not that he's always doing that, but he has done that. And so you realize, truthfully, we need to admit that within the conservative legal movement, we have a problem. And it used to be that if you were a Federalist Society judge
Right.
and you're doing that, you were going to do a good job. And the truth is, that doesn't matter. You could be on the Supreme Court, you could be at the Texas court level, the federal court, and be some great conservative guy who is a Federalist Society member and doing this, but are going to punt as much as you possibly can. So we really do need to have kind of a reflection and an admittance as a conservative movement that we've really failed within the court system.
I'm going to go back to my campaign of 2016, and part of my mantra in 2016 is that it is a bad idea to only have the clique of the legal community, everybody wanted only people that had been judges to run for positions like the Supreme Court. And part of my argument was, in the past we had former legislators, both in the founding era, the founding fathers, and to a great degree, the ones that went into the courts had been legislators, so they respected the separation of powers.
Yes.
The Texas Supreme Court used to be made up of about half former legislators, so they always had a respect for keeping the court in its proper role. And even more importantly than that, if they were a former legislator, they had a voting record. So you knew where they stood on things. They didn't just pontificate about it. They had the pressure cooker of having to push the button and take that position. So
they would be more likely to put the governor in his place. When
Yeah,
he steps out,
absolutely.
they go, wait, I was a legislator. That was our job.
So the
Why are
one
you doing
action
our
step
job?
for everyone tonight is to text, call, and email Matt Rinaldi and tell him he needs to run for Texas Supreme Court.
There you go.
All right, next.
Next trip.
What do y'all look for in a candidate?
Great question. Somebody taller than myself.
The question was, what do y'all look for in a candidate? Go in case y'all couldn't hear Trey. Go
So
ahead.
I'm 5'5". You should be 5'6" or taller.
I
I'm just
barely
gonna
make
keep
the
that.
grade on that. Then.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to exclude you.
Thank you
from ever
yes,
running.
yes,
But so I think the most important thing that you need to have if you're going to run for office, and again, this varies. We go through it in our course on what you're going to run for. If you're running for a city council position or a school board where 800 or 1,000 people are running, then you could be working 50 hours a week and still run for office. But time is more valuable than money. So some of you will have money to put into the race yourself. That's great. It's very valuable. But if you have enough time to go out there, for many offices, 10,000 voters or below, you're going to be able to have a very wide path to victory if you have 10, 20, 30 hours a week to fully dedicate to this thing for 6 or 9 months. You're going to be able to talk to almost every single person that you need to talk to that's going to cast a ballot, which the belief is that if you're an accurate representation of the values of your community, then you would be able to get the votes to win. So time is the most important thing. Ideally, somebody who has relationships throughout the community, who's actually spent some time in the community. Many people are transplanting to Texas who are conservatives, but if you're just showing up, you might need to take at least a year or two, not 10, but a year or two to establish yourself there. And somebody who has a little bit of a proven willingness to fight for the right issues, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they are somebody who's already fighting tyranny at a local level with this COVID stuff, and that they're in a position to
all of that assuming if they're watching this, they already have the right values,
Yes,
right? So
absolutely.
you've already been through the Constitution class. You already know what you believe.
Yep.
You know the proper role of government. And then adding that last one to if you have the right values, you've actually had to fight for them. Because sometimes if you haven't had to fight and
Yep.
you get in this arena, that pressure cooker can move you the wrong
Yes.
direction. Raz, what do you want to add?
Well, that's why you need to take the course. The second module is literally the question is, should you run? And we break down looking at primarily personal, family, and values, asking questions that are going to help you make that decision about yourself. That'll help inform others about you. Important points that you need to know about yourself before you run. And they're the questions that Luke or I would ask if you were coming to us. We'd want you to have already filled these things out, or we're going to ask them to you on the fly to know whether you're the kind of person. Having time, having the relationships, those are all,
Thought I was gonna hit you.
those are all, largely fall into the can you win side of it, which you break down the course. But the should you run side is kind of where I see that as far as, are you the kind of person that I want to support? If you don't check those boxes, then we're not even going to worry about getting to the can you win side, because you're not the person I want to be behind.
It's good. And then take the course and you'll get to go a lot deeper in what they just
How will people find the course? How will they know when it's out?
PatriotAcademy.com. We'll send out emails. Make sure you go to Luke's podcast, get on his email list so you can follow him. Same with Raz. And they want to go to mycampaigncoach.com to get on your email list, right?
Yeah, that's where you get on the email list. If you want just more information, a more general contact page for me, raz.us is the place to go for that.
And for the podcast, LukeMacias.com.
LukeMacias.com. Yep.
Okay.
I think a lot of people have in their mind that running for local office is still going to require hundreds of thousands of dollars to win. Kind of clarify how much it actually takes.
Yeah, no. So again, we go into that in the course, but we're going to give you a little bit of a preview. I mean, the reality is that if you're running for school board in Texas, more than likely there's like 1,000 voters or less in that election this coming May. And so what that means is you're probably going to have an $8,000, $9,000 budget. And we're going to walk you through how to figure out if you have a path to that reasonably. So, many of these races are going to cost $9,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. If you're running for county commissioner in a mid-sized county, $25,000, $30,000 is enough to give you a path to victory. If you're in a small rural Texas community, it might be $7,500 or $10,000 that you spend in total to run for your county commissioner position. So.
I was trying to remember when my father-in-law ran for Justice of the Peace, and he ran against a 16-year incumbent.
Yep.
I mean, that ran the town. I mean, he was city attorney, JP, all.
Yep.
It was basically boss hog, right?
Yep.
And he won. I mean, he came out of nowhere. The other guy was an attorney.
Yep.
Terry was not an attorney, which about 90% of JP. That's another office we should be mentioning is Justice
right.
of the Peace.
Yep.
And anyway, he ended up winning because he called every voter, like
Yep.
you're talking about, called every voter or knocked on their door, had that outreach. But I bet, if I remember right, he probably spent, $4 or $5 grand, maybe, and now that's one precinct out of a county, right?
But
But
should also
yeah,
point out that you're an old guy. So anybody who was like a generation back was like the 30s. So $5 grand in the 30s, like inflation. That's like
it was 10 years ago.
$50,000.
What are you talking
That's
about?
what
It
I'm
was
saying.
10 years ago.
I don't know.
Anyway, so yeah, I think for local office.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen people win school board races with $1,500, $2,000.
Oh, yeah.
So it does depend on where you are. It doesn't have to be $100 grand.
Yes.
Well, we're going to run through those numbers in the course, give you some ideas as far as based on the number of voters that you got to contact.
Yeah.
Here's what a budget looks like for several different types of races, and give you some sample budgets so that it's easy for you to kind of tweak that based on the number to really try to give you a template that you can customize to your size race.
And if you're thinking right now, I don't want to run for office, there's a lot of you that may not want to run for office, but you could write that check for $5,000 to help someone run for school board or city council or whatever it might be. So you could be the one, kind of like Robert Morse was in the Revolutionary War, and some of these other guys that were the financiers of the revolution. Go ahead, bud. What's next?
Do y'all mind moving on to non-campaign related questions?
Yeah,
There's a
Of
lot
course.
those.
Is it marriage advice you're wanting to ask these guys?
Yeah,
What is
yeah.
the,
And kids, we have kids now. We're experts.
yeah.
yeah.
We're actually working on a book.
We
Working
are.
on a book.
How to raise children that end up great, and they're only like 3 and 4, but we're like, they're pretty good. So
We think we got this thing down.
yeah, marriage, kids, that's where we specialize. I spent 2 days without my wife because she had a break, so I feel like I know what it's like to be a single dad, and so I can give that advice.
Anyone can
We're
get
open,
advice from
Trey.
you right now.
Whatever you need.
Kind of dual questions. Clarify Pence's role in the counting of the votes, and then is Trump going to be there at all involved? People are wanting to know. They heard he was going to.
I thought you said non-political questions. Oh, non-campaign.
Non-campaign.
Non-campaign. I thought for sure we were headed to some marriage advice.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's where I was
Question.
hoping we were going.
Yeah.
I'd ace that one. I don't know
Go
the
watch
answer.
my video about the vice president's role, the history of the vice president's role, the examples of Jefferson, Nixon, and Gore. It really depends on what.
Where's the video?
Oh, on Facebook. You can actually scroll down. Yesterday, I covered. I kind of went through a lot of those scenarios that could potentially happen. It is actually up to the vice president how much of that historical precedent he wants to latch onto. Read the article in Epic Times where they interviewed me about this. I think that Louis Gohmert raised exactly the right questions on this. It needs to be answered. What is the role of the VP? What is the role of the House? What is the role of the Senate? This has been debated all the way back to the early 1800s. In fact, in 1821 and 1857, they had to almost shut down the joint session because of all the screaming and hollering and objections. It got totally out of hand. So that's why we need a constitutional amendment to clarify it.
And then he asked if Trump's going to be there. There was something about him.
He could be. I mean, obviously he's saying evidence will be presented. That has not happened before in the joint session. They have broken apart and then had great debates in the various chambers. I would love to see the vice president simply say, hey, if there are going to be objections, then we're going to have a hearing and we're going to present evidence so that the nation can see it, and then we'll make our decisions. At least then everybody's making informed decisions and not having, even like what you were saying, Raz, not allowing people to think that the decisions are being made on these crazy conspiracy theories, but instead being based on here's the facts of what actually happened. The facts are bad enough that I think a senator or congressman can legitimately object, and that way it's not based on just the hearsay that's been going on. So the VP could be the one to do that. Oh, and whether Trump could be there and testify or not, I was actually suggesting the VP should just do, make it almost like an impeachment trial in terms of that it's not the Chief Justice coming over, but it's still you're still.
I wouldn't trust John Roberts.
I wouldn't either.
With like a kindergarten class. So
yeah.
I would just kind of throw this out to the group on a personal and spiritual level for the people who are kind of shocked that they never thought we'd see this stuff happen in our lifetime or this generation. How have you guys kept a level head and remained peaceful during all this crazy stuff?
Well, let's add to that context when you say this stuff happened 2020. Let's just say the tyranny that's happened, the riots in the streets, the chaotic election. How do you stay calm in that and joyful and be what Reagan called a happy warrior?
Is he on mic, or do we need to repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, how do we, in this chaos of 2020 and all the things that have happened that we never thought we would see in our country, how do you guys stay it wasn't joyful. What was the way
peaceful?
You
Level-headed.
Level-headed. When everyone else around you is losing their head, how do you, as a leader, say, this is still the direction we need to go?
I think for me, as I believe it does for y'all, it comes down to faith and family, right? I know who wins. I know that as important as the things that go on here and as important as to answer the call that we have to fight and try to do the best we can with what we have here on earth, I know who wins. I know where I'm going. And I know who's here to support me along the way. That has nothing to do with politics. And it's my family, it's my friends. So especially in a year like COVID, with all this other craziness going on, I know what happens. I know who wins, and I know what's most important. I mean, God and family come well before country on my priority list. And so I'm going to take care of them. Now, I believe that my involvement on the country side is important, but I can't imagine losing my head and letting myself get so distracted with the chaos that I'm distracted from my family. I like to think of, I have two spheres. I have a sphere of control and one of concern. And if I let the stuff that is outside of my sphere of, that's just inside my sphere of concern, but outside my sphere of control, distract me from exercising the control and discipline that I should in my life, then I'm way off base.
That's good.
That's a good one. I just mostly follow Raz's advice.
I was about to say, Luke, that's going to be hard to follow. But
yeah, that's how I just kind of come in and follow him. At the end of the day, too, I think the question is, many people who engage in the battle of politics think that they're always called to win. So then when they lose, it's like, why did I even do this? And you don't realize that like part of the battle is actually knowing that I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to fight for the right thing. One of the incoming freshman legislators of this session, who's going to be a phenomenal state representative, is an amazing Texan, is Brian Slayton, who ran 3 times for the same state office. And he ran the first time and got 49% of the vote. 2 years later, he ran again, got 48.5% of the vote. And 2 years later runs again and gets 59% of the vote. And so this is somebody who lost, and his takeaway was not, oh my gosh, I'm going to walk away. I say there's a certain resilience that conservatives really do deserve to have, because if we are in the battle because we're called to be in the battle, then it shouldn't we shouldn't become distraught by the fact that some guy who's got a bad worldview is making bad decisions. It also doesn't surprise me when Governor Abbott and these other Republicans are making really bad decisions. When John Cornyn reveals to us that he doesn't really fully understand the Constitution, I'm like, thank you for telling Texans what I already knew about you. Like, I'm not freaking out about this because guess what? I'm not surprised. You haven't really respected the rule of law significantly, but I do think that whether or not that gets you all spun up makes you less likely to be able to be a threat to that person. Your ability to just bring that information in and go, okay, what can I potentially actually have an impact on and try to apply yourself in is more likely to actually produce a result than getting frustrated.
I would add to what they've said that this is why studying history is so important, because if you only look at the moment, you're going to be driven by emotion based on what's happening in that moment. When you study history and you look in the context of history, you realize, wait, we've been here before. Either we've been here before or somebody else has, because King Solomon was right. There's nothing new under the sun. Kirk Cameron even said the other day when we were filming for Biblical Citizenship, he said, Rick, we definitely do have our challenges, and there's definitely things happening to our freedom of religion. But if you go back 1,000 years, or you go back 2,000 years, Christians had it a lot tougher than what we're facing right now. So it just helped to give that historical perspective, I think, helps us keep our heads about us and to be happy warriors. And to remember that our joy is not based on who's in the White House. It's whose we are, not where we are or what's happening.
Our churches are still meeting. Many churches are deciding not to meet, unfortunately, but you still have opportunities to worship. We are not the persecuted church that many other churches are around the nation. I was in Colorado with some friends and family drinking wine outside of the mountains going, this is our year of pandemic that we're all trying to survive and emotionally contain ourselves. So if you just back up, there's just so much that our country still has. And in some ways, that's why we're so frustrated that we're throwing it away at a time like this. So it's reason to fight, but it's also reason to say that you don't need to lose yourself.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there. I mean, we definitely want to raise the alarm and say we're losing our freedoms. There is tyranny. There are all these things, but then have the right attitude. You're not going to win if you're frantic anyway, right? So anyway, really good question. Great answers, guys.
Closing thoughts.
We should do this more often. Y'all should just drive down and enjoy.
Hey, it's only like an hour 15 for me. Longer for you.
It's a little longer for me.
Okay, well, some of us are dedicated. Raz is too busy with his family, I mean, some of us are dedicated to this fight, Raz. We're worked up. That's right. Well, you're just chilling out. Goodness gracious.
All right, closing thoughts from you guys. First of all, thank you guys. I really, really appreciate y'all sticking around after the filming and doing this. This was cool.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I love getting to hang out with you guys. And we don't get to do it often enough, that's for sure. And I'm excited about getting to work with plenty of y'all through the course. One of the things that excites me the most is after the years that the three of us have spent in politics, there's a lot of things that are old hat to us that on a city council, school board, county level race, even state rep, they're going to change. You're going to hear them during the course, and they're going to change the way you look at campaigns. And there'll be the nugget that just clicks, and you'll be like, if I hadn't done it that way, I would have lost. Yeah. And in a couple of years, you're going to look back and be like, I'm so glad that I listened to that, because that one nugget may have been what I needed out of that course. Thankfully, I can't speak for myself, but Luke shares a lot of really good information in the course that y'all get a lot of benefit out of.
Our state, our nation, society as a whole is in a battle right now. And it's not a fake battle. It's literally costing people lives. I think of the hundreds of children in Texas right now who are having sexual transition therapy and their puberty blocked, and massive life-changing, in some ways suicide-inducing procedures that are happening to them based on a very scary ideology that is being allowed within our society and will destroy our families. That is the most extreme version of what we're fighting right now today. So it's why we're here. Yeah. It's why we took a Sunday to all come here and spend an entire day talking about things, recording information. And our hope is that anybody listening right now is ready to engage. It might be through running for office. It might be through recruiting somebody else to run for office and helping that person. It might be through taking a Constitution course. It might be through hosting a Constitution class in their time, just like the story you told, where somebody hosts a class, brings people in, gets more of their community engaged, ends up getting recruited themselves to run for office, is now engaged on that level. This is the type of thing we need to be doing, everybody in the nation, in the state. So be on for the ride, and also don't settle. Don't settle for Republicans that just tell you they're not Democrats, because I promise you all they're doing is basically saying, we're going to drive off the cliff, but I'm going to tap the brakes a couple times on the way over. And at some point, that's not conservative at all. You're not conserving. The fact that you say, I'm conserving your life for 3 more seconds because of the brake tapping I didn't actually save us. You actually just set us off the cliff anyways. Just please turn. Just please be willing to pull that lever. So there you go.
I love it. Good stuff. Well, there's I am thinking about what you were just describing and those kids in Texas and the fact that our U.S. House of Representatives is right now adopting these rules to remove gender. I don't know if you saw that from all of their terminology.
They're playing for keeps.
Yeah, they're furthering that very agenda that Luke was talking about. It's going to be an interesting week. It's going to come to a crescendo in many ways this week. A lot of what has happened throughout the year. I would just say, regardless of what happens this week, that the fight continues. Duty is ours. Results are God's. Our job as citizens is not going to change based on what happens on January 6th or what happens on January 20th. All the things that these guys just said, we still need to do, no matter who's going to be in the White House for the next 4 years. It's probably even more important that we do these things based on what the outcome is likely to be when that happens. So, man, just stay in the fight and keep the perspective that Raz was saying. I mean, remember that it's not near as important what happens in the White House as what happens in your house and what you're doing with your own kids and the next generation and raising them. I'm encouraged by what I mean. I know 2020 was an awful year in so many ways, but I am so stoked about how many people are asking the questions we talked about earlier, asking about federalism and Constitution and freedom and the proper role of government. So we've got a lot to be thankful for going into 2021. I believe this is going to be a turnaround year for us. I think 2022, the House and the Senate both in Congress, we're going to see great victories. I think we're going to see big victories in state legislatures across the country. So I think a lot of good stuff is coming if we will be engaged. But also, I will say exactly what we say in the biblical citizenship class, exactly what Benjamin Rush said, that John Adams said to him when he asked, can we win? Can we defeat Great Britain? He said, yes. This was John Adams' response. Yes, if we fear God and repent of our sins. So that's really where it's ultimately at. As Raz said earlier, all this other stuff is downstream from there. So I'm going to ask you guys to pray as we close. Would y'all mind doing that?
Absolutely.
Go for it. Whoever wants to lead, jump in.
I'll start. Oh, Lord, we're just so grateful for the time that you've given us today, the state that you've placed us in, this city, this state, this nation, this year, with this upcoming week for such a time as this. And I just pray that we would be stewards of that, but also that we'd be light in a dark place, that we'd be salt in a world that lacks so much taste, Lord, and that we would just be disciples, that we would serve our families, that we would serve in our churches, Lord, that we would be strengthened through this because our eyes and our hearts are focused on you.
God, I pray as so much chaos reigns around us that we would continue to look first and foremost to you, God, that our folks would be on our chief end to glorify you and enjoy you forever. If we're focused on that, then we're going to do the right thing because our relationship with you will be paramount and our priorities will be correct in all aspects. God, I pray that as we look into the weeks and months ahead, we'll keep our priorities straight. That more than anything, God, more than living our lives in such a way that people understand or know whether we vote red or blue, God, that we would live our lives in such a way that people see a hope in us that may be absent in their lives. That there will be something compelling about the way that we live our lives, the words that we say, the actions we make, the way we care for our families and others around us, that there will be something that they want that we have, and that we have the opportunity to share with them the difference that you made in our life, both here on earth and eternally, God. Guide us. We know that without loving you, without your support, that we cannot win. We've seen it throughout history, from Israel on forward, through our own country's history, and we desperately need that love and revival now in our country, God.
Lord, just thank you for these two gentlemen. Lord, I think of what Bishop Galloway said about the pastors in the founding era, that God needed not reeds shaken by the wind, but mighty men of courage. And I see that in Raz and Luke both, and I just thank you for them. Lord, I pray you bless their families, bless everything they're putting their hands to right now, Lord, and just let them continue to have a great influence on the future of our country. God, I thank you for everybody that's watching tonight and going to watch the recording later. Just pray that you'll prick their hearts to want to do something, and then give them a clear path on what to do. Get them plugged in. Let us all be faithful with what you've given us. Let us be courageous. We need courage in our country so much right now. I pray for courage, Lord, in our leaders at the local, state, and federal level, and that you'll just continue to raise up a remnant that will fight for truth and liberty. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, gentlemen. It was awesome. Thank y'all very much for doing this. The fire even stayed with us the whole time. Reagan only had to stoke it once.
I was just glad you didn't make us wear masks the whole time.
Yeah,
That's what I was
no
worried
masks
about.
allowed on this porch right here, unless it's like a full blown. We're gonna have a paintball war.
Yes,
we
there you
might
go.
do that.
Definitely.
Anything else we need to address? Oh, February 7th is our next trip out to Front Sight for our constitutional defense course. Luke's been out there.
Absolutely.
Raz, if you watch his Facebook page, this guy trains all the time anyway. He's like a total beast, and someday you'll have to go with us.
He's not probably as
I'll
accurate
show
as you and I because he hasn't been to front
Well,
side.
as accurate as me. I've watched yours. No, you're actually good. Anyway, yeah, but
I'm good with a shotgun.
Yeah.
At close range.
Double barrel within 6 feet. I will blow you away. Do not come into my house.
Come join us. Anyway, February 7th. We got another one February 11th. I forget the March dates, May, June. But February you want to come because, frankly, those other ones are going to fill up. You may not be able to come anyway. And if you come in February, you get to spend more time with us. Daniel Horowitz will be back out with us in February as well. So put the link, if you would, in there for Constitutional Defense. If you don't see the link, go to patriotacademy.com. Up at the top, click on Constitutional Defense. It's a great time of fellowship, and you can wear a mask if you want. A few people do in these courses, but mostly it's just total freedom. We actually trust you to make that decision for yourself, and we don't mandate it on you like some, I started to say governors, but dictator is the word that Luke wants to use now.
That's true.
Right? Yeah.
Unilateral dictators.
Unilateral.
Isn't that
Lateral.
like redundant?
Yeah, but it's like it like
Is that a
adds,
politically correct way to say that?
Yeah, and I just think it's like an emphasis.
Y'all sound like Supreme Court justices.
Unilateral,
Redundancy.
dictatorial.
How many
tyrants.
angels can dance on the head of the pen, all that stuff. Anyway, February 7th, join us, and then these guys will have a date at some point to tell you when the campaign coach thing will be ready. But February 12th is your deadline in Texas for filing to run for these local offices. And we really are. I mean, I'm not kidding. 10,000 school board candidates and city council candidates. If you want to stop the Marxism that's being taught in our schools across the country, run for the school board and put an end to it. If you want to stop the defunding of police that's happening across the country, run for the city council and put an end to it. And put an end to the COVID fascism. We need commissioners and city council members to do that. And we will have more on the sanctuary counties and sanctuary cities. We're working with Horowitz and the Bartons and others. So I'm sorry I don't have that declaration ready for you yet. I know some of you have asked that are serving in those capacities. We'll try to get that out as soon as possible. But be looking for those safe havens and places where you can actually live in freedom. I don't think it's going to stop in California and some of these other places. I mean, Fauci's already saying this next, what do they call it, strain of COVID is even more contagious. They're looking for more reasons to dictate to you and run your life. That's what they enjoy doing. So they'll be using COVID for years to come. So we've got to create the safe havens and the bastions of freedom. And hopefully people will look at Florida and Georgia and South Dakota right now, mostly living in freedom and not having the COVID fascism, and their numbers are actually better than California. Actually, you know what? Masks must work really well because California's been doing that for 6 months, and they have the highest number of cases in the country. So clearly masks do work. They work at spreading COVID. Okay, I'm going to be banned from Facebook for saying that. All right, we're done. See you guys. Have a great night.